AI, IoT, cybersecurity, managed services, cloud computing, big data, and ICT organizations in the Middle East. He has over 30 years of ICT experience covering innovation, architecture, and digital transformation. He is an advisor and executive board member of the Government Blockchain Association, which is an organization dedicated to the adoption of blockchain-based solutions by enterprise and governmental organizations. Previously, he was the CTO of ecosystem at Huawei Technologies in the United Arab Emirates, and was the head of global services solutions at International Turnkey Systems and COO at First Information Security. Please put your virtual hands together for my buddy, Jorge Sebastiao. Hey, my man, how are you doing?
Hi, Chris. It's a great pleasure to see you again. I think we have been together in several events so far. We do share some common ground on the areas of artificial intelligence, so it's a pleasure to be here. Today, we are on a slightly different topic, which is DeFi, trust, and obviously cybersecurity. And given the recent kind of cyber attacks, this is going to be an interesting topic. So I'll give it my best for the next 20 minutes or so, and maybe a few minutes for questions.
Fantastic.
Welcome all DeFiers. It's a pleasure to be here. So let me just select the correct window. First, welcome to DeFi 2020 conference. As you know, DeFi is a very hot topic today. And it's obviously an important topic because like Bitcoin almost a little bit over 11 years ago, there's a lot of extreme growth going on. So let me go through the key elements of my presentation today. The first one is the interest in the market cap of DeFi organizations. If we look at the growth overall in DeFi organizations, we see that very several ones, including Compound, MakerDAO, and others, have grown extremely well over the last little while, and they have reached a level of market cap that now is gaining market acceptance. Because of the nature of DeFi and the distributed, decentralized way, it introduces a whole new approach to be able to monetize our blockchain and our virtual cryptocurrencies. To give you an idea of the growth that we have experienced in the DeFi market, over the last several months, 2 months, we had a 2x, or basically under $2 billion. So we can see that this kind of growth, if it is sustainable for the next 1 year or 2 years, will make DeFi gather a lot more interest, especially by institutional investors. Of course, with all this growth and all this attention comes risk. And obviously, the hackers are the first ones to come and knock. If we look at blockchain that got introduced a little bit over 11 years ago, it is based on cybersecurity. I have about 20 plus years experience in cybersecurity, mostly in the areas of encryption, PKI, front-end and back-end elements of security. Blockchain leverages the elements of PKI cybersecurity, but without the need of a centralized authority. So DeFi obviously takes this level of decentralization through the implementation of contracts that actually run directly on the blockchain in an autonomous way. Although blockchain is a technology of trust, and it is based on extremely strong encryption that still remains to be broken, substantial amount of funds have actually been lost. If we look at 2018, we saw a loss of around $2 billion of funds that got drained either from wallets, from exchanges, or simply got lost because of mishandling of multi-segs or others. If we look this as a percentage of the overall funds today being kept in the cryptocurrencies, this percentage is well above what we find as loss of funds in other type of financial institutions. So obviously, this area of cybersecurity needs to be addressed in a serious way to minimize, obviously, the risks. Everything that comes with risks comes from all the elements that we use, from the wallets, from the browsers, from the mobile devices that we have. Many of us obviously have standardized in the last 3 years on Chrome browser as a standard. However, with the Chrome browser, we had a lot of usage of extensions, and we found that many of those extensions are actually spying on our activities. Some of these extensions are actually designed specifically to steal the private keys of our wallets. And as you know, some of these are actually automatically built in as browser Chrome extensions. So this obviously provides us a high degree of risk. The moral of the story, if you're running any kind of browser, is probably a good idea if you're dealing with funds of any type of sort, probably good not to use any extension. So when you use typically the stealth mode or you disable all the extensions, you probably get a much better experience and much less risk in terms of operations. Hackers have gotten better at the way they exploit existing vulnerabilities in the various systems and blockchains that we use. More recently, we had about $5 million that got extracted as overcharged fees based on the code of one of the exchanges. So that really means small transactions in the Ethereum network were charged upwards of $1 or $2 million per transaction, where the transaction fees should have been much lower. The hackers in this case did not actually get access to the funds, but they locked these funds out of access from the exchange itself. That means it creates a substantial risk for an exchange that actually did not do the necessary protection mechanisms in place. If we look more specifically at DeFi, the story is not really much better. In beginning of this year, Q2, we lost upwards of $25 million, got stolen as a result of 3 DeFi-specific hacks. This really means DeFi, being a new growth area, will see a lot of much more further attention as we move forward in its implementation and as we move forward in its growth. The hackers that actually drained $500,000 in Ethereum altcoins from one of these DeFi apps. So this really means that when you have exposures in the code that is contained in these DeFi applications, the hackers can leverage these vulnerabilities to extract in funds and take advantage or lock up the funds so that the remaining users of the smart contracts don't actually get the original benefit that was intended. In some cases, for example, getting a small return of 5, 6, 10, 15% a year by locking either Ethereum or Bitcoins on a long-term basis. If we look at one of the key founders of Ethereum, Vitalik, also from Canada as well, he clearly states, very similar to the way I approach, is we seriously underestimate the risks associated with smart contracts. There's many aspects associated with these risks. One is smart contracts sometimes are written in language where we do not always have too many experts, like, for example, Solidity in Ethereum, although we have much better JavaScript experts. Secondly, most people today run simple audit code tools against those smart contracts. A complete audit of those smart contracts requires not just an automated tool, but a painstaking manual inspection of those smart contracts to actually achieve a much better protection mechanism. Other elements associated with this risk has to do is people, such as programmers, tend to be sometimes a bit lazy. So instead of writing smart contracts from scratch, they tend to go on open source GitHub libraries and clone existing contracts and simply do minor modifications. So any vulnerabilities that are present in those existing contracts automatically get inherited by the new applications. And this obviously extends extremely well to the DeFi world. Same thing applies obviously to wallets that are cloud-based, and a severe vulnerability was found in the Argent wallet that had to be taken extreme measures to prevent complete drainage of funds from this wallet. So that really means that today, if you're looking at keeping your funds, especially when they're locked into smart contracts, you still have to look at cold wallets as the mechanism to appropriately defend the risks associated with that infrastructure. Let's look a little bit more detail at the potential attack space associated with DeFi infrastructure. Today, obviously, we do not have the detailed time to go into each one of these areas, but I just wanted to highlight for you that DeFi as an infrastructure has a very wide attack space, and any organization that is looking seriously at implementing DeFi as part of their new product and marketing, they need to address all these major key areas of attack space if they are really serious about security. So we have different types of attacks, and they focus into this following major areas. We have market attacks that focus on quotations that happen in the market, and obviously market manipulation. Acts can attack the front-end aspects of the platform. We can have attacks against the tokens themselves, which can seriously affect the liquidity of those tokens. Sometimes those tokens are dependent on other tokens, especially they're dependent in many cases on the Ethereum platform. In the case of DeFi, we also have substantial risks associated with bots. As you know, people that do market making tend to utilize bots or generate bots to actually generate specific activities in the online trading. However, when we take these bots to the next level, they can automatically generate exploits or phishing attempts against people that will be putting in place these DeFi infrastructure. And the last part has to do with the redundancy and reentrancy associated with the code that gets deployed and DeFi infrastructure. Is this a complete list of all the potential risks? No, this is a list of the most expected risks that exist today. But as we move forward, this list of risks will actually increase and needs to be addressed if one is actually serious about cybersecurity. Now, what happens to your token when you do not handle security properly? In this case, we have the IMBTC token, and you will quickly see that there was a lot of activity. The token was stable, and all of a sudden, a complete crash of the token. And this happened in the first quarters of this year. Apart from specific elements associated with the code of DeFi, one of the major areas of vulnerability in the infrastructure is the fact that we still use SIM cards as our means to authenticate ourselves against platforms. That really means we have SIM swap as one of the major vectors of attack that obviously needs to be addressed if we are going to be safe. There's been a ruling recently in UAE that dates about 2 weeks ago, in which a bank was forced to pay major return of funds and was found responsible as part of the SIM swap attacks. Of course, SIM swap attacks are not responsibility only of the financial institution, but also of the telecom institution that actually issues those SIM cards as well, and this brings a substantial element of risk. If we look more specifically at how we need to address other areas of risk. DeFi, a market leader in market DAO, also had several emergency shutdowns, and some of it was associated with the sudden drop in Ethereum price. So that really means today DeFi contracts live in an environment that is dynamic. So as this dynamic environment changes, it can greatly affect the operation mechanisms of that DeFi infrastructure. So this needs to be addressed, obviously, as another one of the areas of risk that you need to mitigate and you need to control, and you need to put mechanisms in place to minimize or control the impact of those risks. Other examples was a DeFi project called DeFi Force. LandDFMe had to refund some of the funds that got lost after the attack. This was a loss of about $25 million as a result of a quite recent attack, also earlier just this year. Other things that need to be addressed as part of DeFi is the upcoming upgrade of Ethereum from 1.0 to 2.0. So as we move from proof of work towards proof of stake as a mechanism, some of the existing DeFi dApps will be impacted by this change in the infrastructure. So that really means they will need to potentially rewrite some of the elements of that smart contract to address the changes and potentially result in loss of funds or in the operability of, or the correct operability of that smart contract. Other areas that you need to address, one has to do with scalability. In a few occasions, some of the DeFi operators saw an extreme growth in the number of users in their infrastructure. And of course, DeFi, because of their distributed nature and their cloud-based nature, is dependent on the infrastructure in which they run. This specific DeFi contract made use of the Google Cloud infrastructure, and despite leaving substantial free space, in this case 50% headroom in this database, it still resulted in the operability of this smart contract because of the growth of the transactions and the users in that infrastructure. So by causing downtime, sometimes 2 hours, 3 hours, or even more, this becomes not acceptable. Remember, DeFi is no different than a neo bank or an online bank. So similar to banks, we expect a 24/7 operation in order to result with credibility in the market. I believe, however, that the major area, like Vitalik mentioned earlier in the code, remains the code. So the code today, the blockchain smart contract code, remains the Achilles heel of the DeFi infrastructure. Previous audits of smart contracts in existing ICOs, STO, found 34,000 smart contracts were vulnerable. A lot of that because of the cloning that went on from one smart contract to the other. That really means that you're inheriting the vulnerabilities that were generated by previous teams. The same thing will apply directly on the DeFi infrastructure. Towards finalizing the key recommendations that I find for you today is also exchanges are not safes. Exchanges are places where you trade. Exchanges are places where you generate value. And the same thing is going to apply to DeFi. So the longer you keep certain funds locked into DeFi, the major risks that you have that if that infrastructure gets attacked, you could potentially lose all the funds that are locked into that specific smart contract. That really means that you as a user have to determine what is your right level of risk appetite, meaning the returns versus the risk associated with running in that specific DeFi infrastructure. So when we look at DeFi specifically, we need to put the necessary measures in place to minimize this operational risk, whether this operational risk has to do with the availability of the smart contracts, the cost feasibility associated with migration to new versions of Ethereum, or simply with the vulnerabilities associated with the code. So that really means we need to go beyond just the traditional code audits that we're doing today. I believe that the code audits is a good starting point, but they're definitely not adequate enough to ensure that the DeFi infrastructures that we're implementing today address the necessarily level of risk that will please the institutional investors. You have to keep in mind, as we attract institutional investors into the DeFi infrastructure, we need to beef it up to address all these risks that I've highlighted so far. Apart from the smart contracts, detailed manual and automated audit, I do believe that we need to introduce live monitoring and alert systems that will provide the necessary response to any kind of attack. So that means one of the key elements of surviving in today's modern IT infrastructure is the agility factor. So DeFi needs to have the agility factor to respond to any cyber attack in real time, not by manual means, meaning that if certain thresholds or KPIs are outside of the norms, this may indicate that some kind of misbehavior is taking place. So some stop action would have to be, or pause action would have to be implemented or allowed to be introduced in the smart contracts to minimize these risks. Other last element that I find important is what I call the DeFi leg house infrastructure. The way you build things in DeFi is you have a stack. So you need to take care of all the elements that you're using in building that stack. Are you using the necessary elements that minimize the risk implementation in that DeFi infrastructure that you're building? This is my last comment for you. I do believe that DeFi is one of the key areas that is introducing one of the great deals of disruption in today's blockchain, cryptocurrencies infrastructure. But with this disruption comes substantial amounts of risk. So that really means we need to be able to address this risk. So this disruption turns out to be for good and not for the risk aspect or the bad aspect associated with it. I do believe that you need to bring all your knowledge, all your colleagues that have this cybersecurity infrastructure knowledge to be able to protect this new DeFi infrastructure. My friends to call me sometimes is seatbelt. That means the kind of thing you wear when you drive a car. But today, a seatbelt is not enough to protect you in today's world. So today, when you're in the DeFi world, you're have what we call a gunfight, not a knife fight. So if you bring a knife to a gunfight, you basically are outgunned. So I usually say that if you are about to enter a gunfight, bring a gun, preferably bring 2 guns or bring all your friends who have guns as well, which really means that you have the necessary mechanism to defend yourself in the most effective way possible. This is the end of my presentation for you. Obviously, we continue this discussion online in the conference where we have a few chat rooms or we can chat face-to-face. We can also do some discussions on Twitter, LinkedIn, or other social media. It's quite easy for me to. And I would leave maybe some time for questions. I think maybe there's 1 or 2 minutes. So let's see if there is any questions in the QA section. There is no questions. So what I will do is I will pass the floor down to my friend, Master of Ceremony, Chris, which will take this to our next presentation. So once again, thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you today and to have the opportunity to present at DeFi 2020. And looking forward to meeting you either virtually or in person as we move forward in this interesting world of the new reality. Thank you. Bye-bye.